The first thing that strikes the ear is the hiss of iron against human skin. The second is the silence that follows, because when the mark of ownership sears itself into a woman's flesh in the Roman world, there is no scream loud enough to undo it. Welcome to a story you won't find on the tourist postcards of Rome. This is the hidden horror behind marble columns and grand speeches, the everyday branding of women treated as little more than livestock. Think you could stomach medieval justice? Spoiler, most modern people would faint before the real show even starts. Branding wasn't just some punishment reserved for hardened criminals. It was a way to make sure human property stayed properly labeled, like luggage that couldn't walk off by itself. So, before we start, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to see where and when in the world you're hearing this. As the room softens around you, lean back and allow this story to unfold an experience unlike anything you've listened to until now. Because the darkest secret of Rome isn't just the people were enslaved, it's that their bodies themselves became the paperwork, branded forever with the proof of ownership. Picture the most dreaded stamp you could imagine today, your online reputation ruined, your name permanently trending with scandal. For a Roman slave woman, that kind of permanent mark wasn't digital. It was burned into her skin, impossible to erase, as visible as her own face. Branding wasn't symbolic. It was practical, brutal, and humiliating. The iron itself was often heated until white hot, engraved with initials that stood for an owner's name or for crimes such as theft. A forehead brand was especially favored because, after all, why not make shame the first thing someone sees when they look at you? To the Romans, it was efficient. To the women, it was a life sentence without parole. Historical fact, slave markets thrived in the Roman Empire, with tens of thousands sold in a single year. Branding guaranteed buyers knew exactly what they were getting, no chance of confusion, no chance of the enslaved running off to start over with a new life. Imagine walking through the market and seeing women lined up not just with price tags, but with seared labels across their brows. But here's the quirky tidbit you don't hear in school. Some Romans supposedly used vinegar and even crocodile dung to cool the wound and speed healing. That detail is so absurd you almost want to laugh, until you realize the point wasn't mercy. It was so the scar would be neat and legible, not blurred into uselessness. Historians still argue whether branding was universal for all female slaves or selectively applied to the troublemakers. What is clear is that it was especially common for women accused of running away. The mark on their skin wasn't just about ownership, it was a neon warning sign to anyone else. This person tried to be free once. Don't let her try again. There's also the question of placement. While the forehead was common, some brands were hidden on the arms, the shoulders, even the inner thigh, places that only an intimate partner or a sharp-eyed inspector would see. This raises an uncomfortable possibility. In some cases, a woman's private life was forced into negotiations over her mark. Did potential partners recoil? Did owners take advantage of the secret shame? The brand turned into more than just a scar. It became a conversation she could never opt out of. Modern ears may want to dismiss branding as ancient barbarism, but consider the echoes. Tattoos forced on prisoners in the 20th century, serial numbers assigned in camps, even mugshots blasted across today's internet. Branding was simply the Roman method of turning a person into a file, a record, a piece of inventory. The strange paradox is that Roman elites loved to wax poetic about liberty, citizen rights, and noble virtue. Yet, under the same roof, they casually burned names into women's bodies as though it were nothing more serious than engraving a cup. Rome's great thinkers built a society that celebrated the idea of freedom while normalizing the permanent marking of those denied it. One might imagine these women walking through the bustling streets of Rome, marketplaces echoing with haggling voices, the smell of bread and roasting meat everywhere, while their own skin told a silent story nobody wanted to say out loud. Children may have stared, merchants may have smirked, and neighbors may have whispered, but nobody offered an eraser. That's the quiet horror here, not the flame itself, but the normalcy. When something so violent becomes ordinary, society doesn't notice the screams anymore. That's why the branded women fade from the historical record, not because they weren't there, but because Rome saw them as little more than walking receipts. And yet, just when you think you've absorbed the cruelty of branding, you realize the brand wasn't even the end of the humiliation, it was only the beginning of a long performance of shame. A woman walks through the forum with a basket balanced on her hip. The crowd parts just enough for her to pass, but not enough to hide the 3 letters seared into her forehead. She might as well be wearing a placard that screams her status. For Romans, it isn't awkward or cruel, it's entertainment. People stare, whisper, and sometimes laugh outright because the brand makes her body a billboard of humiliation. This is how Rome works. Shame is public currency. Citizens wield it like a weapon, slaves endure it like a collar, and for branded women, every glance is a reminder that their skin is less theirs and more a civic announcement. The city that built aqueducts and amphitheaters also mastered the art of turning human suffering into public spectacle. Here's a solid historical fact. Runaway slaves were often branded with fug for fugitivus, literally runaway. That mark wasn't just a scar, it was a tracking system etched into flesh. Imagine your worst mistake inked across your face in permanent marker, then multiply by 10, because this one burns. Now the quirky tidbit, some ancient graffiti in Pompeii mocks slaves by sketching crude drawings of people with branded foreheads. Satirical art, sure, but it shows the cruelty wasn't confined to the elite. Ordinary Romans participated, turning branded women into the punchline of bathroom wall jokes. A slave woman's shame wasn't private, it was shared for laughs in the same way memes are today. Historians still argue whether branding actually reduced escape attempts or merely humiliated women into quiet submission. Some records suggest branded slaves ran away anyway, daring to gamble that freedom was worth the permanent scar. Others believe the brand functioned more as psychological warfare than practical deterrence. Either way, Rome's message was loud. The brand doesn't just punish the body, it rewires the soul. The irony: Romans worshipped gods of beauty, fertility, and family, yet marked women in ways that destroyed their dignity. Picture Venus, the goddess of love, smiling from a statue, while real women below her were paraded like defective merchandise. Religion celebrated divine perfection. Society weaponized imperfection. Let's be clear, not all brands were neat little letters. Some were entire words. Others were symbols. Certain slave owners imagined the worst kind of control freak used elaborate branding to personalize their property. Instead of initials, some burned stylized emblems. It's the ancient equivalent of slapping a designer logo across your handbag. Only the handbag bleeds. Public humiliation didn't stop with the brand itself. Women were forced to display their marks in rituals of control. A branded slave might be required to stand in markets bareheaded, so no scarf or veil could cover the scar. One can almost hear Roman gossips chuckling. Why let her hide? That marks half the entertainment. And if you're wondering whether women ever tried to disguise their brands, the answer is yes. Some used makeup or jewelry to conceal them, just as people today might cover scars with concealer. In fact, one account suggests certain ointments could fade the redness, but never the scar itself. A woman might hope to dull the mark, but Rome's cruelty had a way of shining through. The contradiction is striking. The empire prided itself on law and order, yet relied on public humiliation to maintain that order. To a Roman crowd, seeing a branded woman wasn't disturbing, it was reassuring. It told them the system was working. Property was under control, the social hierarchy intact. This perverse reassurance meant that ordinary citizens were complicit. They saw suffering, nodded approvingly, and went back to haggling for olives. Modern society isn't exempt from this impulse. Scroll through social media and notice how public shaming trends. Rome didn't have Twitter, but it had streets lined with branded women, each one a viral post made flesh. People craned their necks, whispered, laughed, and moved on. If anything, the Romans invented the cancel culture of scars. And here's the bitter twist. Branding was sometimes framed as merciful. Rather than execution, a woman might be spared by being branded instead. Rome called that leniency. Picture a judge announcing, "Good news, we won't kill you, just permanently disfigure you so strangers can mock you every day until you die." Some mercy. The brand carved shame into skin, but society carved it deeper into memory. A branded woman carried her punishment into every interaction, bargaining with a merchant, nursing her child, catching the eye of a stranger. The mark turned her into a perpetual suspect, a living accusation that never got dropped. And so, public life in Rome was a performance. But for branded women, the script was already written. They played the role of warning, scapegoat, and punchline. Every step through the forum, every errand run under the Mediterranean sun became a reenactment of Rome's power. But the cruelest part? Branding was just the start of what these women faced once the doors of society closed and the private world demanded even more from their scarred bodies. Behind the thick wooden doors of Roman households, far from the noise of the forum, the scars burned a different way. Public shame was only half the story. The real nightmare for branded women began in private, where intimacy, motherhood, and survival were all filtered through the permanent reminder that they were marked, owned, and never allowed to forget it. Imagine a woman standing in the dim light of a kitchen, the brand across her forehead, just visible under flickering lamplight. To her master, it is convenient shorthand, no need to remember her name or story when her skin tells the tale. To her fellow slaves, it is a warning sign. This woman has crossed a line. This woman has already been punished. To herself, it is the ghost in every mirror, a reminder that even her own body has been rewritten. Here's the historical anchor. Roman law viewed slaves as property with no legal identity of their own. Marriage was not recognized for them, meaning a branded woman's relationship, no matter how genuine, had no protection. Her children belonged not to her, but to her master. Branding didn't just mark her skin, it bled into her family line, ensuring her offspring were born into the same system. Now, for the quirky bit, ancient medical writers like Galen noted that scars could sometimes be softened with poultices of herbs, honey, or even wine. Did branded women experiment with these remedies late at night, hoping the scar might fade? It's tempting to imagine one secretly dabbing her forehead with honey, whispering prayers that the iron's message might dissolve. Of course, the scar always stayed. Rome wasn't interested in letting go. Historians still argue whether branded women faced more danger from within the household than without. Some argue the scar acted as a kind of shield. Masters and overseers saw them as already punished, less tempting targets. Others argue the opposite, that the brand made them even more vulnerable, easy prey for ridicule, cruelty, or exploitation. The truth, likely, is that it varied from household to household, depending on the whims of those in power. Consider intimacy. A branded woman could not choose her partner freely, nor could she expect loyalty. Some Roman men used the brand as justification for dismissal. She's marked, she's less than whole. Others exploited it, taking advantage of her inability to refuse. Love stories among slaves did exist. We know of couples who shared tenderness in stolen moments, but branding hung over such bonds like a silent third party. Even in love, the scar stared back. Motherhood offered no refuge. A branded woman who bore children did so knowing that her mark foretold her children's future. The baby she nursed might someday be sold, punished, or branded in turn. Ancient records mention slave women branded after attempting to flee with their infants. Imagine the horror, not just a scar across your own skin, but the memory that you tried to save your child and failed. Everyday survival became a balancing act. Cover the brand too much and risk suspicion. Expose it too openly and invite mockery. Scarves and veils could conceal, but only if the owner allowed it. One might joke that Roman fashion doubled as damage control woolen headbands weren't just accessories, but desperate attempts at invisibility. The private spaces of Rome were noisy with contradictions. Masters bragged about discipline and control, yet trusted branded women to manage children, cook meals, and keep households running. The same scar that declared them untrustworthy in public made them indispensable in private. It's absurd if you think about it. Branding someone as a runaway, then handing her the keys to your pantry. Rome excelled at hypocrisy. There are whispers in the sources of branded women carving out tiny rebellions. Some turned their scars into dark jokes, mocking themselves before others could. Others wore their marks like armor, staring down the stairs until people looked away first. The scar was unchosen, but how it was carried, that part, however small, was theirs. Let's not forget the psychological toll. Modern studies on prisoners branded or tattooed against their will show lifelong trauma, identity fractures, and constant shame. Imagine the same, multiplied across a society where such marks were normalized. A branded Roman woman couldn't even dream of escape without her scar betraying her. Every plan for freedom had to include the impossible, erasing iron's handwriting. And here's where debate among historians rages. Were these women entirely broken by the system, or did they retain slivers of agency? Some argue the brand was designed to erase individuality, turning them into faceless units of labor. Others counter that scars often become rallying points for resilience, proof of survival rather than defeat. Which was it in Rome? The record is too sparse to say for sure, but it's naive to think every branded woman bowed her head. Private cruelty also had its rituals. Owners sometimes called attention to scars during arguments, jabbing at them as if the iron still burned. Children of the household grew up seeing branded women every day, learning early that some people were meant to be mocked. Imagine being scolded, not just with words, but with the reminder of your scar. Behave, or you'll earn another one. Parenting by threat of fire. At night, when the household slept, what did these women dream of? Did they replay the moment of the iron, or imagine a life without it? Did they pray to gods like Asclepius, healer of wounds, hoping divine mercy might undo what Roman law insisted must remain? Sleep would not come easily when your very skin had been rewritten by power. And then there's the cruelest irony of all. Some branded women became midwives, healers, or caretakers within their communities. Their hands soothed pain even as their own bodies carried permanent agony. Neighbors might trust them with childbirth, with fevers, with remedies, yet never stop reminding them of the scar that made them lesser. It's the contradiction of Rome in miniature, to need someone deeply while never granting them respect. One almost wishes for a record of rebellion, a diary scrawled by a branded woman confessing her anger. Instead, silence fills the gaps. We are left to imagine how resilience manifested in small acts of tenderness, in whispered stories, in the sheer act of enduring. The absence of their voices is itself a kind of cruelty. The household doors did not protect these women. They only narrowed the theater of humiliation. Publicly, they were walking warnings. Privately, they were scarred shadows moving carefully through rooms that demanded their labor while reminding them daily of their mark. And yet, just when you think you've grasped the extent of the cruelty, the system reveals another layer. The iron wasn't just a household tool, it was written into law itself, codified and defended as justice. The cruelest trick of Rome is that the brand wasn't just the whim of a cruel master, it was sanctioned, defended, and legitimized by law. If you think bureaucracy today is cold, picture a world where paperwork isn't on parchment but seared into someone's forehead. In the Roman Empire, the brand wasn't only punishment, it was legislation turned into fire. Roman law was precise in its indifference. The Digest, that massive legal compilation assembled centuries later, preserves how lawyers thought about branding. Slaves were property, so marking them was simply part of maintenance. A brand was evidence legal proof of ownership, like a wax seal on a contract. A woman with letters burned into her skin became self-carrying documentation, a walking affidavit who could never claim otherwise. Here's the historical fact. Roman jurists openly debated whether a branded slave could testify in court. The general answer was yes, but her testimony carried less weight because, after all, the scar already marked her as unreliable. Imagine the absurdity. The brand that punished her for trying to escape also disqualified her from being trusted if she spoke about it. A perfect legal trap. Now for the quirky tidbit. Some Roman officials developed an odd fascination with the aesthetics of branding. There are notes about ensuring the letters are legible and complaints when irons were poorly made. Bureaucrats fretting about font clarity long before Microsoft Word existed. Rome managed to turn human agony into a matter of legibility, as if the real tragedy would be smudged typography. Historians still argue whether branding counted as an official sentence by magistrates or whether it was usually left to household discretion. Evidence suggests both happened. A runaway caught in the city might be dragged before a local authority, branded publicly as part of the punishment, then sent back home. Other times, a master simply ordered it done in private. The law tolerated either method because the system always favored property rights over human dignity. What's striking is how ordinary Romans accepted this. They complained endlessly about taxes, corrupt governors, and bad harvests, but branding, that was fine. The legal framework made it invisible, transforming torture into routine. When law blesses cruelty, society doesn't even flinch. Think of it this way. A modern society obsessed with ID cards and passports demands visible proof of identity. Rome solved that by skipping paper entirely, branding the ID directly onto human flesh. It was efficient, yes, but grotesque. The empire that engineered aqueducts and concrete also engineered permanent shame. The law even extended to runaway hunts. Notices posted in towns describe missing slaves, sometimes noting they were branded. These ads are chilling to read. Runaway girl aged about 16, branded on the forehead, reward if returned. That line makes your stomach turn. A child already scarred turned into a lost item notice pinned to a wall. Legal records also hint at punishment for those who aided runaways. Imagine a neighbor tempted to give sanctuary, glancing at the scarred forehead of a branded woman and knowing that helping her might earn their own fine or worse. The brand didn't only chain her, it chained the conscience of everyone who looked at her. The hypocrisy runs deep. Rome prided itself on citizenship, on the dignity of free-born women draped in stola and jewels. Yet just beyond the villa gates, branded women cooked their food, cleaned their marble floors, and raised their children. The contrast was impossible to miss, but law made sure nobody questioned it too loudly. Some branded women were even paraded in court cases, their scars presented as evidence. One chilling account describes a slave whose brand was cited to prove she had attempted escape before, so her word was dismissed. The scar wasn't just burned into her skin, it was burned into her credibility forever. Let's not pretend Roman elites were blind to the cruelty. They knew. Some even joked about it in literature. Juvenal, the satirist, referenced branded slaves in his biting verses, using their suffering as comedic shorthand for corruption and vice. Rome's sense of humor could be as vicious as its laws. Meanwhile, the daily enforcement of these rules fell to lictors, overseers, and sometimes hired branding specialists. Yes, imagine that. A professional who made their living heating irons and pressing them into human skin. In a world without HR departments, the job description was simple: experienced with fire, steady hand, indifferent to screams. And here comes the most absurd legal paradox. Rome technically allowed manumission, the freeing of slaves. But a branded woman who gained freedom still carried her scar. Legally, she might be free, but socially, the iron never let her forget. Imagine finally earning papers of liberation, only to have every passerby still read your forehead before they read your documents. Freedom existed on parchment. Slavery lingered on skin. Even more twisted, freed women with brands sometimes faced restrictions on whom they could marry. Law and society together reminded them that scars outlast emancipation. It's as if Rome said, "Congratulations, you're free, just not free of us." And here's where the debate sharpens. Some historians argue the legal system intentionally crafted branding as deterrence, while others insist it was just the byproduct of a society obsessed with control. Was it deliberate strategy or careless cruelty? The answer hardly matters to the woman with the scar. The power of law wasn't only in the iron, but in the silence it created. Families couldn't protest, neighbors couldn't intervene, and women themselves couldn't appeal. The brand was permanent, the legal justification airtight. A master could point to the scar and say, "See, she deserved it." And the system nodded along. It's tempting to think of law as neutral, but here it was an accomplice. Rome built an empire on contracts, property rights, and written codes, and in doing so, normalized mutilation as if it were simple bookkeeping. The branded woman wasn't an accident of cruelty, she was the product of law itself. And just when it seems the system has erased every chance of defiance, a flicker of resistance appears. Against all odds, some women learn to bend even this ironclad reality, hiding scars, reclaiming dignity, and forcing society to see them as more than the fire Rome pressed into their skin. Picture the hush of a Roman night. Torches flicker low, footsteps echo down stone alleys, and a woman draws her shawl tighter around her forehead, angling her body to the shadows. The brand is there, etched in angry lines, but tonight she dares to walk as if it isn't. Resistance in Rome rarely took the form of uprisings with swords. For branded women, it was quieter concealment, defiance in small acts, the stubborn insistence on dignity despite everything. This is the paradox that makes their story so haunting. The iron was meant to erase individuality, yet in some cases it seems to have forged resilience instead. A woman who covered her scar with a scarf was not just hiding. She was refusing the state's script. She was deciding how her face would be seen, even if law forbade her the choice. Historical fact: runaway slaves did create underground networks. There are references in Roman sources to safe houses, sympathetic freedmen, and even entire communities of fugitives living on the margins. Branded women who reached these enclaves carried both risk and power. Their scars betrayed them instantly, but they also testified to survival. Within those circles, a mark could be transformed into a badge of shared suffering. Now, the quirky tidbit: some Roman women of wealth adopted decorative forehead bands as fashion. Imagine the irony. While elite ladies strolled with jeweled straps across their brows, slave women pulled woolen cloths over theirs to hide iron scars. 2 layers of fabric, 2 opposite purposes: glamour and shame. The streets of Rome blurred them together for a fleeting moment, a cruel parody of equality. Historians still argue whether branded women could ever fully reintegrate into society if freed. Some claim their scars doomed them to perpetual marginalization. Others suggest resilience and clever concealment allowed some to pass, especially in cities teeming with strangers. The truth may lie between. Survival meant learning when to vanish into the crowd and when to stare straight back at it. Resistance wasn't always hiding. Sometimes it was boldness. A branded woman might choose to leave her scar uncovered, daring others to look. Picture her in the marketplace, chin raised, eyes steady, making her buyers squirm instead of herself. This small reversal chipped away at the intended humiliation. It didn't erase the iron's work, but it turned the scar into a weapon of discomfort. Consider the household again. Masters often relied on branded women for intimate labor, nursing infants, mixing medicines, managing stores. The very proximity gave these women slivers of influence. Some historians speculate they might have bartered silence for favors, wielded information as leverage, or taught their children subtle lessons of defiance. Rome underestimated the power of the branded to shape the next generation quietly. Freedom, when it came, brought its own test. A freed woman with a scar faced the irony of legal independence, shadowed by social suspicion. Some sought new lives in bustling ports where anonymity was more achievable. A sailor might see the scar and shrug. A merchant might not ask questions. In crowded cities, scars blurred into the chaos. Others stayed near their old homes, defiantly raising families despite whispers. There are hints, fragmentary, frustrating, of branded women who became storytellers, entertainers, or healers. Their scars, visible proof of survival, gave them strange authority. In communities of slaves and freed people, such women embodied endurance. Imagine sitting in a candlelit room, listening to one recount how she endured the iron, the whispers, and the law, her forehead glowing faintly in the flame. The scar became not just shame, but testimony. And yet, for every tale of resilience, countless others ended quietly, swallowed by the system. This duality is the hardest truth. Some resisted and endured, others bent and broke. Rome didn't care either way. The empire marched on, indifferent, while the branded women bore their private rebellions or private defeats. Resistance also lived in memory. Mothers told children about the day of the iron, not to terrify, but to prepare. Families whispered warnings: never trust promises of mercy, never forget the cost of defiance. These stories carried across generations, embedding themselves in the culture of survival. The scar spoke even when the woman herself was silent. And the cruelest irony, Rome's obsession with control ensured that the marks it inflicted outlived the empire itself. The Colosseum crumbled, the emperors fell, the laws turned to dust, but the idea of branding human beings carried on. Later ages borrowed it. Medieval Europe marked thieves. Colonial empires burned initials into slaves. Even modern regimes tattooed numbers into prisoners' skin. Rome's legacy of iron has proved disturbingly durable. So where does that leave the branded woman of Rome in this story? She is both invisible and unforgettable. Invisible because official records barely mention her. Unforgettable because the scar makes her image impossible to erase. She walks through history's shadows, her forehead telling a story louder than any scroll could. And here's the most unsettling thought. What if some of them didn't see themselves as broken at all? What if, in the quiet hours, they traced the scar with a finger and whispered, "I survived"? That possibility unsettles as much as the cruelty itself. It suggests that even Rome, with all its power, failed to erase the full humanity of those it branded. Resistance did not topple the empire, but it lived in moments. A scarf tied just so, a stare held too long, a whispered story passed to a child. These small flames of defiance flickered against the iron darkness. And as the centuries rolled forward, those flames carried memory, until we, safely removed by millennia, sit here imagining their pain, their endurance, their whispers. That is resistance too. refusing to let them be forgotten. The story softens now, the iron cooling, the voices fading into the hush of midnight. The torches of Rome are long extinguished, but the memory of those women drifts through time, weightless yet unyielding. Their scars remain etched not in flesh but in imagination, glowing faintly in the quiet corners of history. Breathe slower as the tension releases. The cruelty of law, the jeering of crowds, the silence of private rooms, all of it dissolves into shadow. What remains is the certainty that human beings endured, that whispers of resistance never died completely. See her not as victim, but as presence. She walks past the ruins of marble temples, her shawl drawn close, her forehead both burden and banner. She no longer needs to hide. The streets are empty now, the empire gone, the laws turned to dust. Only the scar remains, a quiet witness. Let your mind ease with the image, a scarred face tilted to the stars, no longer bowed. The weight of shame lifted, replaced by the stillness of survival. Rome fades, the centuries fade, and the night grows softer. You are left with the slow rhythm of breath, the comfort of knowing the story has ended here for now. The iron has cooled, the voices have quieted, the scars have become history. And yet, like all history worth remembering, it lingers, not in fire but in memory. Not in cruelty, but in the resilience that cruelty could never quite extinguish. So rest now, letting the story dissolve into the calm of sleep. Next time, we'll drift into another hidden chapter of the past, where the world again shows how strange, brutal, and unexpectedly human history can be.